Does basic income make people lazy? One of the biggest questions that comes up when you talk about unconditional basic income or universal basic income is the idea that giving people cash is going to make them lay on the couch, not want to do anything all day, because that's what gives meaning to people's lives. Apparently, it's just watching Netflix all day. So what does the research actually say? Let's look at what the research says. Multiple studies tell us that, for the most part, this idea is not very accurate. In fact, giving people unconditional cash gives them a greater opportunity to contribute to themselves, to their families, and their community. There's a few specific studies that I want to go over. The first is the Overseas Development Institute, which conducted the largest meta-analysis of cash transfer programs ever. And it looked at whether or not giving cash in a lot of developing countries had an effect on employment. What they found after looking at 15 years of data and 165 studies was that the main takeaway is a consistent reduction in poverty, which this should be self-explanatory because the biggest reason for poverty is a lack of cash. But perhaps an even more important conclusion that the study had was that most of the evidence is not showing a decrease in work. In fact, almost none of them show any kind of significant decrease in work. And more of the studies show an increase in work participation after receiving the cash. So this is telling us that cash assistance is very unlikely to make people stop working altogether. In fact, that's almost never happens. And there are far more people that increase their work after they have a cash floor, that they can get their life in order, they can be more productive, and they can find jobs where they can offer their best productivity. Okay, so maybe that's not convincing if you want to look at developed countries, because perhaps developed countries and developing countries have different types of cultures, systems, institutions. Okay, well, let's look at Alaska, the United States, where over the past several decades, Alaska has been giving a cash transfer to every single Alaskan every single year. And it varies between $1,000 to $2,000 every single year, depending on the stock market performance that they invest the money in and the oil revenue, primarily the oil revenue. So what does that study tell us? Well, in Alaska, there was no evidence that there is any kind of significant reduction in work as a result of this $1,000 to $2,000. On the contrary, what they found was that when businesses are receiving this influx of demand, they're more likely to hire people for part-time work. That's the theory. So you see a spike in part-time work as a result of the cash transfers in Alaska. So that's the United States. Let's move to Asia. In South Korea, they have a program to give 24-year-olds in Gyeonggi province a cash transfer, and it's used in a local currency, which means you can use the money at any of the local businesses. What they found was that it increased purchases at local businesses by 23%. You're also connecting these young people to their local community, and you're stimulating a lot of demand. So the local businesses are very happy, and there's nobody talking about how there's a dropout among work among these folks. So this is another example where you're giving even young people this opportunity with a cash transfer, and it is not harming the economy. It is almost certainly helping the economy by stimulating consumption and demand. So you might say those examples are fine and good, but maybe those aren't the most developed economies. Even in the United States, it's only Alaska. What about Europe? Well, let's look at the most famous example in Europe, Finland. Finland decided to do an experiment with a few thousand participants to see how sending out unconditional cash might affect people's willingness to work. And they also looked at other measures like well-being. The experiment ultimately found the most important takeaway was that people who received the basic income were much happier, they were much more optimistic, they were much more trusting, and they had much better overall mental health if you look at these characteristics, compared to those who didn't receive the basic income. Now, the experiment was often portrayed as a failure because it didn't increase employment significantly, which was the main reason that they were actually looking at this program. In Finland's case, was that they were hoping switching to basic income could have a dramatic increase in employment right away. However, I'd say that this framing is really bad because, in fact, giving a couple thousand people a basic income and only giving them basic income for a couple of years is not going to fix everything in the employment sector. But what it can do is give individuals the opportunity to make themselves more productive for the long run, make themselves happier, and live a happier life. But more importantly, it certainly did not decrease their motivation for work. In fact, those who had the basic income worked a couple days longer than those who didn't. At the end of the day, even though Finland was portrayed as a failure in its basic income experiment, it was quite successful in that it was helping to address some of the biggest issues that we face today of mental well-being and happiness and finding our own productive meaning to life, which I think is a lot more important than just increasing or decreasing work hours within a couple of years. So from the research that we see, the idea that basic income makes people lazy is a myth. There isn't really any research that's showing people drop out of the workforce in any substantial measure in modern times. And more studies are showing that people are increasing their work over time because they're more motivated, they're more productive, they have better well-being, they can pursue jobs that they enjoy. And also businesses are more likely to hire because there's more demand out there from a broader range of consumers. So what we see is that we can give people a new lease on life with unconditional cash. And that's the focus we should have instead of focusing on whether or not a few people might become lazy with a few extra dollars.